We're here with Trevor Loudon, author of Barack Obama and the Enemies Within, available at Amazon.com and off of your site?
PacificFreedomFoundation.org.
And you can also get it off of ConservativelySpeaking.net at the moment. Now, Trevor, your book talks about the background of the president and the background of people who were in the Democratic Socialists of America. Can you tell my readers, what are the Democratic Socialists of America?
Well, there's two major Marxist groups in this country. There's the old Communist Party USA, which is still very strong, but Democratic Socialists of America is about 7,000 members, and they are a Marxist group, pro-communist, and they infiltrate the Democratic Party because they don't use the communist name. They're accepted within the Democratic Party, and they hold office in the Democratic Party at all levels, including several congressmen, a whole bunch of state reps all over the country, and a whole bunch of people in the labour unions and academia. So that New Zealand, they're basically this country's strongest Marxist group.
Now, when we talk about communist Marxism, a lot of people don't know the history of communism. The Cold War pretty much ended in everyone's mind around 1991. The Berlin Wall fell down. If you're under 30, you might not know that communism was the greatest mass murdering system of the 20th century. Killed about 100 million people overall.
Exactly. It was the most vicious totalitarian system that's ever existed on this planet. We all understand that Nazis were killers, but the Nazis were allies of the communists, and the communists far outdid the Nazis in the scale of their slaughter. You know, in Cambodia, in China, in the Soviet Union, they killed at least 100 million people. Some estimates put it even higher.
In fact, a lot of people don't realize that when Hitler and Stalin signed his pact, the non-aggression pact, that the communists in America were suddenly all, we need to stay out of World War II, until Hitler invaded Russia, and suddenly they were all gung-ho for fighting against Hitler.
Exactly. The American communists were effectively allies of the Nazis. They were trying to keep America out of the war so Hitler could finish the job, conquer Europe and conquer Britain. It was only, the communists would love the Nazis. It was only when the Nazis betrayed the Soviets and invaded the Soviet Union that the communists became anti-Nazi.
Now, it's very strange. It's always been very strange to me that we've never had a problem rightly demonizing the Nazis, but even during the Cold War, as far back as the mid-70s and the like, you had a very strong contingent in America that anyone who wanted to oppose communism was considered a crank or something. How is that? Or was that deliberately through Soviet influence at the time?
It was deliberately through Soviet influence. Like, they attacked anybody. They had an anti-communist movement. And there was a lot of people in the American media, a lot of people in the American Congress who deliberately ran cover for the communists. They were sympathetic to the communists. They basically loved their ideals but wouldn't come out publicly and say so. But what they would do is criticize or ridicule anybody who actually stood against communism. And this has been a fifth column, a traitorous movement within this country for decades.
In fact, in your own land of New Zealand, the place where the greatest movie trilogy of all time, The Lord of the Rings, came from, the movement that banned U.S. ships was actually trained in the Soviet Union during the communist era.
Exactly. I interviewed a New Zealander who infiltrated our Communist Party, and he was sent to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. 7,000 students training in this big institution, all the future world communist leadership. And while they were there, they planned how they could make New Zealand repudiate the Western alliance, break our alliance with your country, and they used the communist movement in my country to infiltrate our Labour Party, to infiltrate our labour unions and our peace movement, to get that legislation promoted. And hardly a New Zealander would have any idea of the policies they're so proud of that were designed in Moscow by the KGB at Lenin's Institute. And the big secret of communism is the ability of tiny Marxist groups, and they do it in this country. They infiltrate the local Democrat Party and get their policies promoted as law, as legislation, and everybody thinks, oh, the Democrats did it. What they don't realise, these are communist policies that are infiltrated into the Democratic Party through the labour unions, which are controlled by the communists.
Now, you mentioned 1995 as the big year. That was 4 years after the wall came down, where the Marxists became particularly involved in the labor unions. What happened in 1995 that made the difference?
Well, basically in 1995 there was a coup within the US labour movement in the AFL-CIO, and a group of Marxists in the SEIU and AFSCME got their man, John Sweeney, a member of Democratic Socialists of America, elected as president of the AFL-CIO, and he removed the anti-communist clause from that organisation's constitution, which meant communists could then again hold office in AFL-CIO unions. And since that time, Democratic Socialists of America, a Marxist group, and the Communist Party USA and other Marxist groups have come to retake over the US labour union movement. So any labour union member who's paying dues to the AFL-CIO, whether they understand it or not, is basically supporting socialism in this country.
Now, where does Barack Obama's youth come into it? Now, we know from other things that his father was an anti-colonialist, didn't care for the British and so forth. Where does Barack Obama's influence here? Obviously he came from Chicago, which was a big center of the socialist movement, but how does this connect to Obama's upbringing in his formative years?
Well, his father was a Marxist. His father was far more than an anti-colonialist. He was a Marxist socialist. His grandparents were leftists. They attended a communist-run church in Seattle. His mentor as a young man, Frank Marshall Davis, for 9 or 10 years, was a hardcore Communist Party member. He was in Hawaii, but he had actually come from Chicago. And incidentally, Frank Marshall Davis, the communist who mentored Obama, was also connected to both the grandfather and the father-in-law of Valerie Jarrett, who is now Obama's closest advisor, and was also connected to people who mentored David Axelrod, who is now trying to get Obama re-elected. So Obama has worked with communists and Marxists his entire life. When he moved to Chicago, he hooked up with both the Communist Party and Democratic Socialists of America, and they used their labor union power and their influence in the black churches of Chicago to get Obama elected, first to state senate, then to the US Senate, and then to the presidency.
But this is something that he was like brought up with. It's not a question of, oh, I suddenly want to destroy America. From your contention, this is what he was taught as a youth, so he just thinks this is the right thing. Would that be correct?
Exactly. This is a whole history, his family background, his youthful mentors. He has worked with Marxists and anti-American socialists and radicals his entire life. This is not something he found in his 20s or as a young man or briefly flirted with. He was brought up in the faith, so to speak. He was mentored in the faith. He has kept the faith, and he's promoted Marxists his entire life, worked with them, appointed them, carried out Marxist policies. He is through and through a Marxist.
So the surprise would be not that he is a Marxist, the surprise would be if he wasn't, because that would have been something. One other thing, you were instrumental, from what I understand, in exposing Van Jones, and I recall something Van Jones said, that he wants to be less of an open Marxist and more of a commentator. And I've noticed over the last 10 years, and this has been something that I've seen a lot of, you've had organizations and publications that have supported the old Soviet Union, like The Nation, like Mother Jones, people like Catherine Vander Heuvel, are now suddenly considered mainline commentators for Democrats who would normally not even be allowed on television because they were considered too fringe. You now see them on MSNBC, on ABC, on panels. How has it been that so many of the people who were Cold Warriors, the Scoop Jacksons of the Democratic Party, have they all become Republicans? Is that basically where the Democratic Party is now?
Well, basically the Democratic Party has been taken over. And that happened really since the 1970s. And a lot of Democrats are loyal Americans. They all think they're still voting for JFK or Harry Truman or Scoop Jackson. But since the 1970s, through the labour unions, particularly through academia, the Democrat Party has now been taken over at the highest levels by Marxists, radicals, Democratic Socialists of America, affiliates of the Communist Party USA. So they are now running the Democrats.
Now, if you look at the timeline, again, communism fell in 1991, although Putin was an ex-KGB man and old habits die hard. Of course, China is still out there, Cuba is still out there, quite a few totalitarian communist people are still out there. But if you're born, let's say, in 1980, you may not understand. You're talking people who are 30 and younger. They have no idea about any of this. What can people do, in addition to buying your book, to find out about the history of communism and what it has done and what it is trying to do today?
Well, one of the very best books they could check out would be the Black Book of Communism, which details the crimes, the huge crimes of the communist movement in the 20th century. But if they want to know about America, one of the very best things they could do is check out a DVD, what is it called? Agenda Grinding Down America. Agenda Grinding Down America. Order it online, and that details the subversion of America by the Marxists through the churches, the labor unions, the education system, through the last 50 or 60 years, and how what is now called the progressive movement, which is basically a socialist Marxist movement, has altered the face of America to the point where your country faces basically being changed forever, going to the point of no return. So Black Book of Communism and an Agenda Grinding America Down, which I appear in, those are the two best sources, in my opinion, that can educate Americans to what's going on today.
Trevor Loudon, author of Barack Obama and the Enemies Within, I understand you. Thank you very much. And you're going to be in the country for how long speaking?
I'm here right through to after the election. I'm speaking at about 60 or 70 events all around the country, wherever I can, to get the message out. My big message is the real agenda of the left here is to destroy the military of the United States of America, because if they do that, there is nothing to stand in the way of their dominating this planet. Is
there a place online where we can find the list of places you'll be, so people who are watching this video can find it?
On my blog, trevorloudon.com, I have a regular update of state by state where I'm going to appear, and a long-term itinerary of where I'm going to be over the next few months.
Trevor Loudon, thank you very much for your time. I know you have places to go today, so thank you again.
Thank you.